Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Samantha Ragunanan. This lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saivono Discovery Center. You may contact us on the number 079-578-2908. I'll repeat it, 079-578-2908. You may send messages but not voice notes or videos. Let's get started. Today, grade 12s, we are going to discuss the topic of responding to the environment in humans. The presentation will be done by myself and my colleague Agnes Moabello. Let's look at what this entails in our exam. So you will find responding to the environment in humans in paper 1. And it's for 54 marks. So 54 marks is a huge chunk out of the 150 marks in paper 1. So what you need to do is you need to go over the neurons, the brain, the spinal cord, and the human eye and the human ear. For this session, we'll be focusing on the neurons, the brain, and the spinal cord. The neurons, we're going to touch on the fact that they are specialized cells which connect the brain to the spinal cord and to all other parts of the body. The functions of the 3 types of neurons are the motor neuron, the sensory neuron, and the interneuron. And then we're going to touch on the different parts of the brain, as you can see there. We're also going to discuss a very important section called the spinal cord and the reflex action and how it works in the spinal cord. So as we move forward, that's what your exam guideline look like, and we know that the exam guideline basically is the recipe for success. So when we want to know what we need to study for the exam grade 12s, we will have to look at this exam guideline, and we will have to go through all of these topics and make sure we know them for the exam, okay? And as you can see, these are the topics that I have just mentioned. Let us continue with the content itself. Now, when we talk about responding to the environment, we are basically talking about, as you can see from the word itself, responding is like how you react, okay, to the environment. So in order to survive, all organisms must be able to respond to the environment. What happens to your body when you encounter danger? Now, if you look at this gentleman in this picture, like all animals and all plants, they have defense mechanisms to protect themselves against the outside. And the way we have been created, we have what is called sense organs. We are able to see, that means we are able to see danger approaching, we are able to hear, we are able to taste, and we have senses which also make us aware of what is going on around us. Now, if you look at this gentleman, I don't think that he walked towards this lion and said, "Let me pet the lion." Let's just try and figure out what could have happened in this picture. He was possibly in the veld and he heard a growl with his ears, and he turned around and he saw the lion, and then he opened up his eyes wide. As you see in the movies, when people are surprised, they open their eyes up wide and their pupils dilate so that they can see more clearer. And his heart probably started pumping very fast, and then he knew that he needed to run. He couldn't just stay there with that lion. So just in this situation where this gentleman is facing danger, because, look at that lion. The lion looks aggressive. So when we face danger in everyday life, our body has defense mechanisms to enable us to produce the right chemicals, to arouse our sense organs, to make us more aware so that we can react and coordinate our response to this. So now if we look at the coordinating systems that we have in our body, we have 2 coordinating systems, okay, which allow our body to adapt to changes in the environment. We have the nervous system and we have the endocrine system, okay? So the endocrine system you are familiar with because you've done it in grade 11. For today, we are only going to focus on the nervous system. And the nervous system is basically a whole network of nerves that's in our body that goes through to every part of our body and allows us to pick up and respond to these stimuli or changes in our environment. So let's talk about what nervous coordination really is. Nervous coordination is when all the parts of an organism work together smoothly, okay? The nervous system allows humans to react to their surroundings and coordinate their response. This is a very important sentence because it basically sums up the nervous system in one sentence. The nervous system allows humans to react to their surroundings. So something is happening in their surroundings, whether it's on the outside, it's not just on the outside, also changes can happen in the inside. And then we coordinate our responses. So sometimes when we say coordinate our response, that means something happens and then we respond and we behave in a certain way to help ourselves to feel better. So if you look in these diagrams, we will just take one or two. If you look at this diagram, you can see the person is feeling cold. So what do you do when you feel cold? Do you walk around in your shorts and your t-shirt? No. You put a jersey on, you put a long pants on, or you put the heater on, that sort of thing, okay? So there is an internal stimulus on the inside of your body. You're feeling cold. So what do? You react and you respond by doing this. And the same thing when it's hot. If you're feeling hot, you'll put the fan on, you will take out maybe a few layers of clothing so you can feel cooler. So that is all how our nervous system allows humans to react to their surroundings and coordinate the response. So you must remember that when you are writing your paper, it's 1 minute, 1 mark. So you need to make sure that you know your content. So when you come to the questions, you will be able to answer them. So you must be able to identify these diagrams. You must be able to say what is going on in these diagrams. The stimulus can come from inside or outside the body, like we explained. Now, stimulus is a change in the environment. So the signal, if you look at the last sentence, the signal we received from the environment is called the stimulus. So what can the stimulus be inside our body? Maybe we're feeling hungry. So your stomach will send a message to your brain and say, I'm feeling hungry, and then you go to the fridge and raid the fridge. Or maybe it can be outside the body. As you can see, the person got hurt on the outside, and so they are feeling pain within their body. And the message is sent to their brain to say, you know what, they need to administer some first aid. So cells called receptors tell our bodies about changes in the environment. Now, remember we spoke about receptors being sense organs. And they're very specific. We have certain receptors in our body that pick up changes in pressure. We have receptors in our body that pick up changes in temperature. We have receptors in our body that pick up chemical changes. So receptors are very, very specific to what they pick up. So these cells called receptors, they are able to tell anything that goes on around us or inside us, okay? So let us move to how does your nervous system actually work? It's really, really simple because it's something that you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So let's look at the stimulus. Now, remember we said the stimulus can come from inside or outside your body. The stimulus can come from inside or outside your body. And the stimulus sends a message to the receptor where there are cells in the receptor. And this receptor, the cells in the receptor, pick up this message and it changes the message to an impulse. So an impulse is sent to the sensory neuron. So what is an impulse really? An impulse is basically a message that the brain understands. So yes, there are messages that take place in our body, but it needs to be in a certain language, okay? And this message is electrical impulses. So the impulses are sent to the sensory neuron, and the sensory neuron sends it to the central nervous system. The central nervous system being the brain and the spinal cord. So what happens there? the impulse is taken up by the brain. So the brain analyzes the situation and says, what needs to happen? So for example, if you put your finger on a hot stove, okay, the stimulus is picked up by your finger. The message is sent now to your central nervous system. The impulse is sent, and then your brain interprets that information, and it sends the message back to your hand to remove it. And all that happens so fast. It's not like you stand by a hot stove and you touch a hot stove and say, okay, the stove is hot, I'm going to take my finger off. No, it doesn't happen like that. Am I right, grade 12? It's within a split second. You touch the stove, it's hot, and you move your hand away. So that is how the nervous system does work, okay? And then it goes to the motor neuron. Remember, we spoke about it going to the effector muscle, which is your finger, and then there is a response. What is the response? The response is when you take the finger off the hot stove. So this is how our nervous system works. Basically picking up a stimulus and effecting a response to coordinate the reaction, okay? So the nervous system is a very, very important system in our body, without which we cannot function. So that is why it is for 54 marks in the paper. So this is a section which you really need to study very, very well, because it's almost a third of the paper, okay? So let's talk about the nervous system in vertebrates and how it performs its 5 main functions. So the nervous system has 5 main functions, which is whatever we discuss, we just need to formalize it and put it in the correct format so that when they ask us in the exam, we will be able to remember it, okay? So in order to be able to perform any function, it needs information. Am I right, grade 12? It needs information. So obviously the first function of your nervous system is to gather information. You can even make a mnemonic. You can take the first letter of each word and you can make a sentence, and that's how you can remember it for the exam. So it gathers information and then it transmits the information to the processing area of the brain. So transmits basically means sends the message, okay? And then the third function would be it processes the information. So what does it mean when it processes? It's got the information, it's analyzing, so now it's deciding the brain is deciding, what do I need to do with regard to this? Which system should I alert? Should I alert the respiratory system? Should I alert the reproductive system? Should I alert the circulatory system? So there's many systems. So this is where the nervous system is connected to them. And then, okay, besides processing information, it formulates a response. It formulates a response. And the fifth one, it sends the information back through the network of the effector muscles to execute the response. Usually this involves the use of muscles, isn't it? Because if you maybe you're walking and you step on a nail, automatically you lift your leg up. Your brain is sending a message to your effector muscle in your leg to tell you to lift your leg off that nail, that you are feeling pain. So that is how it sends the information back to the effector muscles. Usually when the effector muscles is involved, it's got to do with effector organs, usually involves the use of muscles. Okay? So let's talk about the central nervous system itself. So the central nervous system is divided into 2 sections, which we're going to deal with differently. So the first section, this diagram is very, very useful. So when you're studying, you can use these diagrams because it helps you to see exactly what is what. Remember, when you are studying, diagrams are your friends, especially in life sciences. If you can't remember something, if you're having difficulty swatting the work, use the diagrams and draw labels on the diagrams, and you will be able to work. So let's look at the nervous system. The central nervous system, or we also know it as the CNS. It is an accepted abbreviation. So we know it as the CNS, and the central nervous system, or the CNS, is divided into the brain. Obviously, I think by now you know what the brain looks like. And then the spinal cord. The spinal cord is that part that runs down the back of your, runs down your back in the middle. The one that is surrounded by your vertebral column, the middle bone in your back. And then you have the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral meaning around, isn't it? So you have a whole network. As you can see, you've got a whole network of nerves in your body. So all the nerves that are not the brain or the spinal cord, they belong to the peripheral nervous system. So it should be very, very easy to remember, because just by looking at these diagrams, you can remember which is the central nervous system and which is the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system on its own is divided into the sensory pathways and the motor pathways. Now already that word can tell us the sensory pathways, it carries impulses from the sense organs. So if you cannot, having a problem, remember, look at the question, look at what it is saying. And the motor pathway obviously will send messages. So the sensory pathway will send messages from the sense organs to the CNS, or the central nervous system. And the motor pathways will send the messages from the CNS to the organs or the glands, wherever it needs to effect the change. And the motor pathway is divided into a further two. So the first one is the voluntary or the somatic nervous system. So a voluntary nervous system is one way you are in control of it. So if I decide I'm going to keep quiet, I'm keeping quiet. It's hard for me to keep quiet sometimes. But yes, if you decide you want to walk from one end of the room to the other, you think about it, you are in control. That is your voluntary nervous system. Okay? However, you have an involuntary nervous system. That means you don't think about it. Like, I'm not thinking right now, I'm going to blink, blink, I'm going to blink, blink. No, it's something that is automatic, okay? And we call it autonomic. So your breathing, all of those things, it's all autonomic. That means it's involuntary. And then you have something called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, which we'll unpack a little later. So that is the central nervous system in a nutshell. It's the brain and the spinal cord. So let's look at the external structure of the brain. So we remember that the brain, we've got a nice diagram of the brain for you. It looks a little bit slimy, but yes, it's the brain. That's what your brain looks like. Okay, and your brain has many different layers and many different levels. So if we look at the brain, and we know that for any structure in life sciences, we need to know what is the brain all about, what is protecting the brain. And obviously you have the cranium, which is the bony structure which houses your brain. And then you will have layers. There are 3 layers which you would find in your brain, and they are called meninges. And this meninges, between the second and the third meninges, you'll find a fluid. And these meninges, like any other structure, they are made up of many different folds. You can see the folds there, and they help to protect the brain, okay? If we look at the next label, we're talking about gyri and sulci. So these are plural terms. So the single term is gyrus and sulcus. So these folds that you see in the brain, you see these little curves. If we look at the diagram of that, that's what it actually looks like. So the gyrus or the gyri is the top part. It's basically a bump. And the sulcus is these grooves. So that would be the sulcus and that would be the gyrus. So basically they increase surface area, they provide protection for the brain. And then the other part of the external structure, now we're only talking external structure. We are talking about the brain stem. There's the brain stem, which obviously leads to the spinal cord. And then we have this bulbous section here, which we call the cerebellum, one of the very, very important parts of the brain. And then on the other side, we got the largest part of the brain, which is called the cerebrum. Okay? This is the cerebrum. Now you need to be sure that you don't confuse these two, because they sound the same. So that is what your external structure of the brain is, and we know that it's got protective structures by the meninges, the cranium, and the cerebrospinal fluid. Now, we've looked at the outside of the brain, we're going to now look at the inside of the brain. Okay? What we need to always remember about the brain is that it's divided into the left and the right hemisphere. So your brain is actually divided into half. It's got a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. So that's what it looks like on the inside. Let's unpack the labels in the brain. So we said that the largest part of the brain, we said that that would be the cerebrum, okay? And now this cerebrum is responsible for very, very important functions. It's responsible for voluntary actions. It's responsible for sensations. Remember we spoke about your sense organs, your higher thought processes. So this is the part of the brain where when you think about something and you do it, that is the part of your brain that we are talking about. When you are studying, when you make a conscious decision today I'm going to learn life sciences, that is the part of the brain that helps you to do that, okay? And then the next part of the brain, you'll see they also call this part the tree of life, because this part of the brain, it looks like tree branches on the inside. So this very important part is called the cerebellum. Now, I think when you are studying the cerebellum, you must remember the key word for the cerebellum is coordination. It coordinates things, okay? So it coordinates balance. So that cerebellum is that part of your body. You know, when you were younger, you used to spin around and play, and then you'd feel like dizzy, and then your body, some part of your body would tell you you need to stand upright so you can feel good again. That is the cerebellum. It controls even my posture as I'm standing here. It helps me to stand upright. It helps me to coordinate my hands. All of that is your cerebellum. So don't confuse the cerebrum and the cerebellum, because there are questions. When you see the word coordination, you already know that the cerebellum is involved, as you will see in a short while. Okay, and then for this label, it's the medulla oblongata, or some people like to say medulla oblongata. I feel that this is the most important part of the brain. Do you know why? Without this part, look at the functions of this part. It's important. It's responsible for breathing. It's responsible for peristalsis. Peristalsis is that muscular movement. Remember when you did nutrition in grade 9 and they said the food forms a bolus and it pushes the food down? That's peristalsis. It's responsible for coordinating your heartbeat, your swallowing, your blinking, your coughing. Like if you're choking, this is the part, the medulla oblongata, it actually does coordinate and makes these movements possible. So far, we've done the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the medulla oblongata, or medulla oblongata. So we're going to move on now to this little portion, and this is the pituitary gland. So the minute we see gland, we must remember, the minute we see a gland, we know it's excreting something. Yes or no? So in this pituitary gland, you would find the endocrine gland, and it secretes a substance, which we're not going to go into detail just yet. And then we have the hypothalamus, okay? And the function of the hypothalamus, you know, when you're feeling hungry, or you're feeling thirsty, or you're feeling tired, this is the part of the brain that is responsible for that. So how will you remember it? H for hunger, isn't it? So try and remember that. H for hunger, this is the part that coordinates hunger and thirst and all of those things. And then this part here is called the corpus callosum. So I like to say callosum because it keeps the two hemispheres of the brain close. So just some funny, silly humor, but it helps me to remember. Close meaning it joins the two hemispheres of the, close. So it keeps the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, it keeps it joined, okay? So that is the corpus callosum. So that's basically the internal structure of the brain. Now, it's not enough to just know the structure. We know in life sciences, we can learn all the structures, we can know them off by heart, but we need to know how the structure relates to the function. We must be able to apply it in the examination, because they're not just going to give us a diagram to label. They're going to ask us questions on the diagrams. So we need practice with past year papers, and that's what we're going to do today. So let's look at this diagram. It says give the labels of parts A to C. So it's A, B, and C. Remember, it says A to C. So those labels, if we look at them, A is the cerebrum, we know. Remember, we said that the cerebrum is responsible for voluntary movement. The corpus callosum, we said it joins the two hemispheres, and the cerebellum, the tree of life. That's how you can identify and remember that. And they say, give the letter and the name of the part responsible for coordinating all the voluntary movements. Now, when you first look at this question, you're going to think, oh, it's definitely the cerebellum, because it has the word voluntary movements. But the answer is, I would have thought that it would be the cerebrum, but when I saw the word coordinating, I remembered that the cerebellum is responsible for coordinating it. And we need to also look at the question. It says, give the letter and the name. Give the letter and the name. Look at the mark allocation. The mark allocation is 2. So you can't just give the letter because you're going to miss out marks. So you need to, grade 12, you need to read the question very, very carefully. So this is something I don't know if many people these days have practiced with. It says, give the letter and the name of the part responsible for remembering a cell phone number. Now, most of us or you have iPhones and normal Android phones, and I think we become spoiled when we can't remember the number. But if we do need to remember our number, the part of the brain that is responsible for that would be the cerebrum. Remember the thinking part, isn't it? The one that helps you to study and remember things. That's the cerebrum. The cerebellum, as you mentioned earlier, is the one that coordinates the movements. So now it says, explain the two functions of parts E. So there's E. So what would be the function of that part? It controls breathing, peristalsis, heartbeat, and swallowing. We know that this is the medulla oblongata. It's obvious. Because remember, without this certain structure, we would not be able to survive. That is why when you're learning the function, learn this function first. Because it is the main function, and with that you can identify it. Because it's quite a popular question. Now if we look at part F, we need to, and it also transmits impulses from the spinal cord to the brain. So because it is found here in the back, it is connecting the brain to the spinal cord. So you can't see at the back, but it's connecting my brain to my spinal cord, which is behind me. And then we look at label F. So label F, there are several functions of the medulla oblongata. That is why, the minute we finish with one, we see it controls less important reflexes such as blinking, coughing, and sneezing. Vasodilation, which causes your vessels to go larger or smaller. Dilation will cause it to go bigger, and constriction will cause it to go smaller, and even salivating for your digestive enzymes. And then if we look at part F, remember, so now let's look at F. F would be, what label would F be? Because it's controlling things like hunger. Remember we said hunger is hypothalamus. That's how we remember it, isn't it? So the hypothalamus will control hunger, thirst, sleep, body temperatures, and emotions. That's actually quite an important part, because you need to be emotionally stable to be able to function. And then we look at the others. Provide 2 ways in which part D is protected. Now already we know that part D is going to be protected by the cerebrospinal fluid. It is protected by the vertebra, because the vertebra are those bony-like structures which house, and the spinal cord is found on the inside. And then which functions of the body might be affected? So that is one mark. The second mark will be by the membranes called the meninges. So the meninges, even though we discussed the meninges here, it still extends down to the spinal cord. So there's 2 ways in which the spinal cord is protected. It's protected by the vertebral column, and it's protected by the meninges. And then we also have, in addition to this, the cerebrospinal fluid, because we know any fluid within a structure forms as a shock absorber, and it helps to prevent damage, mechanical damage. Number 5, which functions of the body might be affected if the lower part of the head receives significant impact in a car accident? So this happens because they call it whiplash. Sometimes when people are driving and all of a sudden they need to brake, and then this part of your neck is affected. So what will be affected? Your medulla oblongata. And we know the importance of the medulla oblongata. I'm not going to go through it again, but we know that it's got to do with breathing, heartbeat, digestion, and all those communications between the brain and the spinal cord. So do you see how the question cannot always just be straightforward? They will ask in-depth questions where you need to be able to know the content. So when you get a diagram like this, I would suggest you first find the labels. Try to label the diagram, and then after you label the diagram, in your mind, during the exam, you can do that on the diagram. Write down the functions of each part. So here you can write down higher thinking for the cerebrum. You can write down voluntary actions, you in control. All of those things, you can write down the functions. And then afterwards, you can strategize and then go to the questions. It will be so much easier because sometimes you feel overwhelmed when you see the questions. And then it's not as easy to remember being the matric exam, okay? So find strategies that works for you. So let's talk about the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord is different from the brain because the brain has gray matter on the outside and it has white matter on the inside. It has gray matter because there's muscle bodies, there's cells, all of those things which make it gray. And on the inside, the brain has it has connective tissue, it has axons, so that color of those substances are white. But in the spinal cord, it's actually the opposite. You got white matter on the outside, and you got gray matter on the inside. And you can see it's like an H-shaped structure on the inside. So your spinal cord, you would find leading from your brain going down. And we know that this is important. The spinal cord is the pathway for all impulses conducted from the receptors to the brain and from the brain to the effectors. It's basically the main connection. It connects our brain to the rest of our body. It connects the rest of our body to our brain. It is absolutely important, the function of the spinal cord, because nothing will happen without the spinal cord, okay? And then we know that the spinal cord processes all reflex actions. So basically, when the spinal cord functions, it's not under your control. It's automatic. So you can't control your spinal cord. Whatever is happening there, the reflex actions, it happens automatically. If someone has to knock you on your knee, your leg would move out automatically. It's a reflex action, okay? And in the spinal cord, you have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nerve impulses. So we're going to unpack that now. If you look at the peripheral nervous system, we said already, I've touched on this, the sensory pathways, the motor pathways, the voluntary functions and the involuntary functions. But now we're going to talk about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic division in much more detail. So the peripheral nervous system, if you look at this diagram, basically this is the CNS, it's the brain and the spinal cord. Everything else here that is connected from the brain, that's your peripheral nervous system, okay? And in the peripheral nervous system, you have the somatic nervous system. This is your conscious activity. That means you know what you're doing. It's like walking, talking, all of that you are doing consciously, you know what you're doing, okay? And the autonomic nervous system, these are unconscious activities. Like I mentioned earlier on, we're not going to go into detail because I've already mentioned that the autonomic nervous system is your breathing, your heart rate, all of those things, your blinking, that is all unconscious nervous activities and you don't think about it. So let's talk about the autonomic nervous system. This is actually very, very interesting. Now I want you to take your mind back to the gentleman who was running away from the lion, because this is what's actually happening in his body or in your body when you are faced with danger. You have the sympathetic nervous system, and this is programmed basically for danger and to protect your body. So what happens when you face danger or when you are scared? The sympathetic nervous system kicks in. Your pupils are dilated. That means your pupils get big. Your saliva, because it's not like the man, why he's standing there with the lion, he needs to eat or he's feeling hungry. He is not feeling hungry. So it inhibits. That means stops or slows down the saliva from forming. It relaxes the bronchi. It accelerates the heart. His heart starts beating fast because now his heart has to pump blood to the rest of his body so that his muscles can get blood and oxygen so he can run away. So that's what most of these activities have got to do. It stimulates glucose. Glucose is important for energy. Those of you that go to the gym, you know, okay? it relaxes the bladder and contracts the rectum. So this is basically this is what the body does to protect itself in danger and to be able to survive danger. But then the body can't stay in this state, dilated pupils, fast heart rate, all of that. It can't stay in that state all the time because your body can't handle it. So that's where you have the parasympathetic system. So this balances, this causes your body to go back to normal after this emergency situation. And it does the opposite. So while the one causes your body to be protected through these actions, the other one causes your body to slow down, constricts the pupils, stimulates saliva, basically the opposite, inhibits the heart rate, stimulates digestive activity, all of those things. So the autonomic nervous system, basically, if you look at it, there are two parts, okay? And they have the opposite effect on each other. The one stimulates and the other one inhibits. So stimulates is sympathetic. Stimulates is sympathetic. Inhibits is parasympathetic. Okay? And each organ is innervated by the sympathetic nerve and the parasympathetic nerve. Now, what does it mean, innervated? Innervated basically means that the nerve cells are concentrated in that certain organ during that time and they are highly functional. Okay? And that brings us to the end of this section. My colleague Agnes is going to take you through the section on nerves and reflex action. It's actually a very nice section. So please stay tuned for Ms. Agnes Marbello, who is going to take you through the rest of the session. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon, grade 12 learners. Welcome back to the second session where we'll be doing respond to the environment. My name is Agnes, and we are going to do the last part together with the questions where I'll be assisting you on how to answer the questions. Now, the first one that we are going to start with in terms of the session, we're going to be looking at the nerves. And one can ask himself or herself, what are nerves? Now, when we talk about nerves, you must know that your entire body, the whole body, consists of nerves. Now, these nerves carry signals to and from all other parts of the body. So, going back to the nerves, we are saying a nerve is composed of millions of neurons. Now, if you are to look at the structure of the nerve, right, this is the structure of the nerve. Now, we are saying, remember, we've said the nerve is made up of millions of neurons. And if you can check again, the nerve is composed of nerve fibers that are held together by what? By connective tissues. Here are the connective tissues. So all in all, what we are saying is we've got many nerves. We've got many nerves throughout the entire body, and then each nerve is made up of millions of neurons, right? So we've got the nerves, we've got the neurons. Now again, you can ask yourself, what are the neurons? So neurons are nerve cells. Remember, we've said nerves are made up of millions of what? The neurons. Then what are neurons? Neurons are nerve cells. They are specialized cells which connects the brain and the spinal cord to all parts of the body. All right? Now, we've got types of neurons. Now, when you look at the neuron, all neurons, they are made up of these three parts. All neurons are made up of the cell body. All neurons are made up of the dendrites and also the axon. So what will assist you in order to differentiate between types of neurons is the position of the cell body. You'll understand when we'll be doing the entire types of neurons. So the position of the cell body is going to assist you to understand, to differentiate, to establish that, oh, this is the sensory neuron, this is the motor neuron. Okay? Now, each neuron is made up of a cell body, dendrite, and the axon. Now, for an example, this is the structure of the neuron, okay? So we know these thread-like structures, we call them the dendrites. Look at this other part, we call it the cell body. Now, when we look at the cell body in it has got a nucleus. So what we are saying is, with life sciences, you need to know parts of that diagram given. You also need to know the functions given. So we've got the dendrites there. Now they are thread-like structures. Now those dendrites always carry impulses to the cell body. Here are the dendrites. Now they are going to carry impulses to the cell body. Then from the cell body, what is going to happen? Impulses are going to be transmitted to the axon, right? So the dendrites always carry impulses to the cell body. And what is going to happen? Now look at the cell body. The cell body controls the metabolism of the cell, right? Now let's look at it again. Here are the dendrites. They carry impulse to the cell body. And what is going to happen to the axon? Axon carries the impulse away from the cell body. All right? Now, again, we'll be looking at the neurons. Remember, we've got millions of those neurons in the entire body. Now, let's look at, remember we mentioned the dendrites. We also mentioned the axon. Now, what is going to happen? Look at the axon together with the dendrites. They are wrapped together. Now, this part here is pink in color, but what we call it? We call it the myelin sheath. Now, the myelin sheath wraps around the axon and also the dendrites. We will learn why, what is the purpose of that. So, axon and dendrites have the myelin sheath that wraps around them. Now, if we look at the axon and the dendrites, remember we say they have the myelin sheath, which acts as an insulator and also speeds up the transmission of impulses. Remember, the sensory neuron will sense the change in the external environment, right? Which is the stimulus. Don't confuse these terms, the stimulus. Then the stimulus is going to be detected and is going to be converted into what? Into an impulse. So impulse is going to be transmitted through what? Through the axon. Now, the myelin sheath is going to speed up the transmission of what? Of impulses in the axon. And also it acts as an insulator. Okay? So we have got 3 types of neurons. Remember when we've started, I've told you the parts of the neurons, the cell body, the axon, the dendrites, and also I've indicated that in terms of the cell body, it is the one that is going to assist you to differentiate between types of neurons, the sensory and the motor. Now there are 3 types of neurons. We've got the sensory, we've got the motor, we've got the interneuron. Now let's go through those. Now, the first one that we are going to look at is the motor neuron. Now, when we look at the structure of the motor neuron, look at the position of the cell body is at the terminal end. Okay? So, by the position of the cell body here, it tells you that this is the motor neuron. Now, the other word for the motor neuron, the other name for the motor neuron, you can say it's efferent neuron. Efferent neuron. So when we'll be talking about the sensory neuron, you can talk about the afferent neuron. Right? The motor is the efferent neuron. The sensory is the afferent neuron. Okay? So it is important, grade 12 learners, to know all parts of the neuron. So we spoke about the dendrites. These are the dendrites. Okay? We spoke about the cell body. Now the cell body has got a nucleus within, and we also have got the cytoplasm. All right? Then we'll be having the axon, which will be wrapped around by what? By the myelin sheath. Remember, the myelin sheath serves for insulation and also serves for what? For the quick quick transmission of what? Of the impulses to the terminal end of the axon. Okay? Look, even here we are showing the direction of the impulses. So dendrites will sense that stimulus, which will be converted into impulse, and the impulse will be carried from the dendrites to the cell body, from the cell body to the axon. So the axon carries the impulse away from the cell body. Okay? Now, this is the motor neuron. What is the function of the motor neuron? It transmits impulses to the central nervous system. So this is the abbreviation for the central nervous system. Motor neuron, what does it do? Transmit impulses from the central nervous system. Where to the effectors. So each time when we talk about effectors, think of what? Think of the glands. Think of what? Think of the muscles. Right? So motor neuron carry impulses, transmit those impulses Where to? From the central nervous system to the effectors, to the muscles, or to the glands. Then what will happen? The muscles bring about change. Okay? Now the other type of the neuron, remember, I've introduced the sensory neuron. Now with the sensory neuron, don't forget also, look at the position of the cell body is nearly towards the middle. Okay? So the sensory neuron is the afferent neuron. That's the other name. What is the function of the sensory neuron? It senses and transmits the impulses. Where to? So the afferent, which is the sensory neuron, transmits impulses from the sense organs or receptors. Where to? To the central nervous system. So in the first session, we have learned that the central nervous system, we're talking about what? The brain. We're talking about what? The spinal cord. That runs through your backbone. That runs at the back. Okay? So, motor neuron transmit impulses from the central nervous system, whereas the sensory neuron transmit impulses from the sensory organs. Where to? To the central nervous system, which is the CNS. So, sensory neuron, remember I spoke about the impulse, the change in the environment. So what we are saying, the sensory neuron is sensitive to us, to stimuli in the environment. So in the environment, we talk about the stimuli, but what is transmitted is what? Is the impulse. The other type of the neuron, we've got the interneuron. Inter means in the middle. Inter means, in this case, it is going to connect the two. Remember, we've got the sensory neuron, which is the afferent neuron. We've got the motor neuron, which is the efferent neuron. Now, in order for the whole system, the nervous system to work, remember, the two can't work alone, but we need the interneuron that is going to connect the two so that the impulses are going to be transmitted to the brain, to the central nervous system, and away from the central nervous system. So we've got the other type of neuron, which is the interneuron that connects the two. So we find the interneuron in the brain and also in the spinal cord. Remember, I cannot emphasize more to say we've got many of those, millions of those, where in the brain and also in the spinal cord. Now, the interneuron is going to do what? It receives impulses from sense organ and connects the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. So it connects the two. Okay? Do not forget, we spoke about the position of what? Of the cell body that is going to assist you also. Now, having done the neurons, remember, we have spoken about the motor neuron, types of neurons, the motor, the sensory, interneuron connecting the two in order to help, to assist in the transmission of impulses to the central nervous system, to the brain, to the spinal cord, and away from the brain and the spinal cord to the effectors. Remember, when we talk about effectors, we'll be talking about what? The muscles. We'll be referring also to the muscles, okay? Right, or the glands. Now, we're going to do a few questions based on those concepts. Now, with the questions that we're having, remember, you also need to get all the past papers, even if it's not all, few sets of question papers, so that you get used to the way we're asking the questions. Now, this question says the diagram below represents a neuron in a human. So the human has got what? Millions of neurons in the entire body. So remember, I've said to you, you need to identify by looking at the position of the cell body. You are able to tell the type of the neuron. Okay? Now the first question says, okay, before you even attempt the questions, grade 12 learners, you need to study what is given. Now what is given, we've got a neuron there. You give yourself answers before you can even attempt looking at the marker location. Now you study what is given. We have got A, B, C there. You can tell what type of neuron is there or what type of neuron is given. So identify the type of neuron represented in the diagram for 1 mark. Remember, for the fact that the position is at the beginning of the neuron. It is not in the middle, but it is found at the beginning. Here we've got terminal dendrites there. So identify the type of neuron. The type of neuron given is a motor or the efferent neuron. What will assist you there is the position of the cell body, okay? Now, number 2, state one function of B. Can you check B? This is B here. What is the function of B? Remember, we've spoken about the dendrites transmitting what? Impulses to the cell body, and then axon is going to carry impulses away from the cell body. So you first need to identify. If they say state one function of part B, here is part B, you first need to identify it. What is the name of that part so that it can help you to give the function. Okay? So B transmit impulses away from the body, the cell body, and also transmit impulse to effectors, which is for 1 mark. Any one of those is correct. Now, explain the role of part C. Remember, we spoke about the part C that wraps around the part B. B is the axon. What wraps it around is C, part C. Now, explain the role of part C in the functioning of the neuron for 2 marks. So, it causes it to conduct what? Impulse faster. So, if the axon is not wrapped around by a myelin sheath, are we expecting the impulse to be carried faster? No. But if it is wrapped around by the myelin sheath, we know it is going to assist in the impulse to be transmitted faster, quicker. Okay? So it causes it to conduct impulse faster, or it prevents a short circuit, or it insulates. So remember, one of the functions of the myelin sheath is to serve as an insulator. It insulates the neuron. Okay? That is for 2 marks. Okay, since we have introduced the nerves, which we say they are found in the entire body, and in some cases, one can be nervous, you will ask yourself, why am I so nervous? Think of what? Relate it to what? To your body, where we say we find the nerves, and these nerves, each of them has got what? Millions of neurons. Now, what is going to happen? In the first session, we spoke about your body, whereby someone hits you, or you've got a knee there, and then someone hits you with a hammer. Can you just sit still and say, the person is hitting me with a hammer? No, wait. You are going to react, isn't it, girls and boys? You put your fingers on fire. Are you going to leave your fingers to burn? No. What you are going to do, or what are you going to do? You're going to remove your hands or fingers faster. Now let us look what happens to the entire system when that happens. Okay, we're going to look at the reflex action and reflex arc. Action, arc. Analyze those two words, action and the arc. So with the reflex action, what do we mean by that? Now a reflex action is a quick response to the stimulus. You put your fingers on fire. Now, what is going to happen? When you act fast and remove your fingers, that actually is what? Reflex action. So reflex action is a quick response to the stimulus. And reflex action occurs automatically. So we're saying a reflex action, according to exam guideline, you also need to know your definitions, right? So the reflex action is a quick, automatic response to stimulus. Right? Now examples, we've got a knee jerk. You can jerk your knees. That action is automatic. Also, we have an example of sneezing. When you sneeze, you don't sneeze by the will. You don't choose to sneeze, but it happens. That can happen automatically. We also have an example whereby you can remove a body part away from danger. Like we have given an example where you can put your hands on fire or on a hot substance. What is going to happen? Obviously, you're going to remove so that you don't feel that pain. Or if you feel the pain at that time, the pain is going to be lessened. But imagine leaving your hand to burn. Then it means something is wrong with your nerves. Okay? So reflex action is a quick, automatic response to stimulus. What about reflex arc? Remember, with the action is quick. It's a quick response to what? To the stimulus. But with reflex arc is a pathway. Now, reflex arc is a pathway along which an impulse is transmitted to bring about a response to stimulus during a reflex action. Right? Now, here's a note on the side to say, remember, neurons are transmitting what? Impulses to the central nervous system and away from the central nervous system. So do not use those general words. Like, don't talk about the message. Don't talk about messages being transmitted to the central nervous system and away. But use the scientific terms to say impulses are transmitted to the central nervous system and away from the central nervous system. Now, we spoke about the reflex action. We've spoken about reflex arc. Reflex arc is a pathway, but the significance of the reflex action, grade 12 learners, the reflex action allows for a what? A quick response. Because if it was not of the reflex action, we were going to hurt the whole body. Okay? We are sensitive to pain, so you can leave any other part of your body. What will happen if I slap you? Will you give me the other side? It's not easy. But you are going to react. You are going to react by removing your face where someone slaps you. You are going to react. Now, the significance of reflex action. The reflex action allows for a quick response without even thinking about it. I cannot hit you, I cannot slap you, and you just leave me like that. What is going to happen? Without even thinking about it, you are going to, protect yourself. You are going to quickly remove your face so that I don't repeat it. Okay? So that, okay? Now, when we look at the reflex action, It allows for a quick response without thinking about it, also to prevent damage to the body. That is the purpose, that is the significance of a reflex action. Now, I'm going to give you the illustration of a reflex act, the pathway taken when you need to act, when we need to have that reflex action. The pathway taken. Now, this is an example of a pathway of a reflex act. So, if you put your hand on a hot substance, remember, sensory receptors in the skin is going to sense the change in the environment, the stimulus there. Then what is going to happen? The impulses are going to be transmitted through what? The afferent pathway. Remember, relate the afferent with what? The sensory neuron. So the impulses are going to be transmitted through the afferent pathway. Where to? To the dorsal root. Now, from the dorsal root, what is going to happen? Remember, where do we find this dorsal root? Think about what? The spinal cord. So, in here, remember, sensory neuron transmit those impulses to the central nervous system. Now, what is going to happen in the brain? In the brain, that impulse is going to be registered in the brain. That impulse is going to be interpreted. So registering of the impulse in the brain, then the brain quickly interprets the impulse. Then what is going to happen? We've got sensory neuron, which is going to be joined together by interneuron. Now the interneuron is going to connect that sensory neuron to what? To the motor neuron. Then what is going to happen to the motor neuron? Through the ventral root, then we're going to have impulses being transmitted through what? Efferent pathway. Remember, the motor neuron is the efferent neuron. So the efferent pathway, where to? Remember, we've said the motor neuron transmits impulses from the central nervous system, think about what? The brain, the spinal cord, to the effector muscles or to the glands. Okay? From the effector organs, from there, if the impulses are transmitted to the muscles, what is going to happen? Okay? Now, the biceps are going to contract. When they contract, what is going to happen? We're going to see the response there. Now, with the response, you are going to do what? You are going to withdraw your hand. And imagine, if you are burning, or if you put your hand on a hot substance, and sensory neuron senses the change in the environment there, to say this is heat, then the impulses are going to be transmitted where? To the central nervous system, where the sensory neuron is going to be connected to the motor neuron by what? By the interneuron. And then through that pathway, the impulses are going to be sent where? To the muscles, effector muscles. Then what is going to happen? You're going to withdraw your hand. Imagine you are bending and you withdraw your hand slowly. You are going to bend. So what do you need to do? Anyway, it's automatic. So what are you going to do? You're going to quickly withdraw the hand so that you don't bend, so that you don't hurt your head. So in that way, we are simply showing what? The reflex act. Remember the brain, the spinal cord, the brain registered the impulses. The brain interprets that to say, hey, you are bending there. you have to do what? To remove your hand. So in this case, impulses are being sent to what? The glands. Impulses are being sent to what? To the muscles, okay? Right, we're going to do the following questions. Now, like I was saying, you study the diagram, you quickly label before you can even answer those questions. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the labelings. Now you are to identify the parts. 1, 2, 3. Let us look at 1. Here is 1. Here is 2. Here is 3. All right? Okay. 1 is cerebellum. 2 is medulla oblongata. 3 is cerebellum. So also, when you're going back to the brain, remember the largest part of the brain, we were saying it is the cerebrum, it's the largest part of the brain. In the first session, Samantha did all the functions of the brain and also whereby you are going to be able to differentiate between the two. Now, the other question, remember we also looked at the hemispheres. We have the right and the left hemispheres, which are going to help in what? Remember, part of the brain, the other part of the brain is going to assist in the coordination. Imagine if you are walking, we're looking at the coordination of the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So if you're moving your legs, what is going to happen? You'll be moving along with the right leg with the left leg. We can't be having a situation whereby we've got all the right-hand side moving along. Then that won't do well, okay? Right, what will happen if one strikes you with a hammer on the knee? I take my hammer, I strike you on the knee. What will happen? Hammer strikes the knee, stimulate the receptors, okay? The stimulus, remember, when you talk about the action, reflex action, that's when stimulus is going to be detected, sensed. So stimulus is converted into impulse. Whatever the stimulus, for an example, if you put your hand on fire, the stimulus there is heat. You are going to burn. So the change in the environment, which is the stimulus, is going to be sensed by what? By the sensory neuron, which is going to convert the stimulus into an impulse. Now the impulse is going to be transmitted where to? To the sensory neuron, to the dorsal horn, where sensory neuron makes a synapse. Now when sensory neuron makes a synapse with an interneuron, remember I've indicated that the interneuron connects the sensory neuron with the motor neuron. But then in that connection, they don't touch one another, but they are leaving a space. They are leaving just a small gap there. Okay, so the sensory neuron makes a synapse with an interneuron. The impulse moves along the interneuron to the motor neuron via what? A synapse. It moves along the motor neuron in the ventral root. That's what I've shown you when we were doing the reflex arc. Now, it moves along the motor neuron in the ventral root to the effector or to the muscles in the leg. Remember, I was hitting you where? On the knee. Okay? When I was hitting you on the knee, obviously the receptor organ should be your leg, whereby you are going to quickly move your leg away from the area where I was hitting you. So it moves along the motor neuron in the ventral root to the effector or to the muscle in the leg, which reacts and the leg is raised upward. Because you can't just sit still and someone hits you with a hammer, you are going to hurt your leg. Okay? Now, in the diagnostic report 2021, so with the diagnostic report, remember we are looking at the way you are attempting your questions, the way you are responding to the questions given, right? Now, this is neuron 1, this is neuron 2. Okay, we've got the labels there, A, B, C. We've got A, B, C. Remember when we started, we looked at the parts of the neurons, the cell body, the dendrite, the axon, the myelin sheath, stuff like that. Now, the question says, for 3 marks, explain how the speed of transmission of impulse will differ for neuron 1 and neuron 2. Neuron 1, here is neuron 1. Neuron 2, here is neuron 2. Do you think the transmission of the impulse will differ between the two? Yes, it will differ. Because of what? Look at the axon there. What covers neuron 1 is the myelin sheath. What covers neuron 2, there's nothing there. Remember, you also need to know the function of the myelin sheath. It insulates, it transmits impulses quicker. Okay? So explain how, this is high order question. Explain how the speed of transmission of impulse will differ. You have to think here for this 3 marks. Okay, right. Now the impulse will be transmitted faster in neuron 1 than in neuron 2. Because of what? Neuron 1 has got a myelin sheath. And neuron 2 does not have a myelin sheath. Remember, you need to talk about the two. You need to talk about the two. Because you are looking at the differences between the two. Explain how the speed transmission of impulse will differ for neuron 1 and neuron 2. So in your response, you need to respond to neuron 1 and compare it to neuron 2. So what we are saying, impulses will be transmitted faster in neuron 1 because of the myelin sheath, and neuron 2 does not have a myelin sheath. And then, or you can say impulses will be transmitted slower in neuron 2 because it does not have a myelin sheath and 1 has a myelin sheath. You get the point? Then you get your 3 marks there. Okay? Explain why person will feel the stimulus but will not be able to respond if one of this type of neuron is damaged. So we've got neuron 1, neuron 2. If one of this neuron is damaged, explain why a person will feel a stimulus but will not be able to respond. Okay? Now, the central nervous system receives or interprets impulses from the receptor or sensory neuron, or from the sensory neuron, but no impulse will reach the effector. So, if one of the neuron is damaged, no impulses will be transmitted. If sensory neuron is damaged, or motor neuron is damaged, or you don't have interneuron to connect the two, what will happen? No impulse will reach the effector. That is for 3 marks. Okay, let us look at the synapse. What is the point of synapse? We've spoken about the interneuron connecting the sensory neuron to the connector neuron. I've mentioned that they don't just touch one another closely, but they are leaving a small gap, a small space. So what is a synapse? One can ask herself or himself. A synapse is the point where an impulse passes from terminal branches of the axon. Okay? This is the axon covered with myelin sheath. We've got terminal ends. Now, what is going to happen? A synapse is the point where an impulse passes from terminal branch of the axon of one neuron to the dendrite of the next neuron. Okay, let's say this is a motor neuron, and then we've got dendrite of the sensory neuron. Now let us look at what happens. Point of synapse is where impulses are being transmitted. Where to? Point of synapse is a space whereby impulses are transferred from the terminal ends to the dendrites of the other axon. So a synapse is a point where an impulse passes from the terminal branch of the axon of one neuron to the dendrite of the next neuron. So I've indicated that neurons never touch each other, but they live in what? A space. And that space, we call it a synaptic gap. I hope you understand that. Now, chemical neurotransmitters help to transmit the impulse from one neuron to the next across the synaptic gap. So when we think about the synaptic gap, think about that small space, that small gap between the two neurons, whereby the terminal ends, impulses are transmitted from the terminal ends, where to the dendrites of the other axon. That space where transmissions of impulses take place is assisted by what? Chemical neurotransmitters. All right? Now, the important significance of synapse. It ensures impulse travels in one direction. From where? From the terminal ends of one axon, of one neuron, to the transmitters of the other neuron. So, synapse ensures impulse travel in one direction only. When we spoke about the reflex arc, we have observed the direction whereby impulses are traveling. Sensory transmit impulses to the central nervous system, motor away from the central nervous system. So, synapse ensures impulse travel in one direction, and also it speeds up, or it helps the impulse to be transmitted faster. Or they can slow down, or the flow of nerve impulse can be blocked. So either synapse and nerve impulse can either be speeded up, slowed down, or blocked. It also helps to do what? To help, therefore it enables unnecessary or unimportant background stimuli to be filtered out at that gap. This is what is going to happen. Now, DBE question paper 2020. Give only the number. Give only the numbers 1, 2, 3, or 4 of two neurons that. Okay, number 1. You are given types of neurons there. We've got neuron 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, for you to know which one is which, you look at the position of the cell body. Okay, so give only 1, 2, 3, or 4 of two neurons that transport impulses from the receptors to the central nervous system. Look at the ones given, and then you tell which ones transport impulses from the receptor to the central nervous system. So it is 1 and 4. Remember, by looking at the position of the cell body, we can tell it is the sensory neuron. Okay? Give two neurons that will have a faster transmission of impulse. Remember, for faster transmission of impulse, we'll be looking at what? At the axon that is covered by myelin sheath. All right? So, it will be 1 and 3 because they are covered with myelin sheath, and 2 and 4 they are not. Okay? Give 2 neurons that are damaged if a person can feel stimulus but is unable to react. Is 2 and 3. Cannot react is 2 and 3. That is from previous paper, 2020 of November, DBE. Right, from 2028, here is another question. We've got neurons A and F. We've got this structure, interneuron C. We've got B, we've got E. So let's answer the following questions. The diagram below represents a possible path followed by an impulse when a person touches a hot plate. This is an example that is liked by examiners, right? When you touch a hot plate, what is going to happen? Name the path represented in the diagram 1. Where is 1? Let's look at our 1. Okay. Right. Name the path represented in the diagram. Now, what is the name of that path? It's a reflex arc. What is reflex arc? Is a pathway. All right. So, identify the type of neuron represented by B. Let's check it. B is what? Motor neuron, because of what? We can see the position of the cell body. And then identify the type of neuron represented by what? C. Where is C? This is C. Is interneuron, basically because it is connecting neuron B and neuron E. This is an interneuron for 1 mark. Okay, E, let's look at E. Where is our E? Okay, this is E. E is sensory neuron. You can see the cell body is nearly in the middle of the axon. All right, 2018 June paper. This is a diagram. Give a letter only of the part that represents receptor 1. All right, now with receptor 1, we've got what? F. Okay, effector 1, we've got what? A. This is our effector A. Give a letter and name of the region where the impulse is transmitted chemically. Give the letter and a name of the region where the impulse is transmitted chemically. Remember, that region we call it what? A point of synapse, or you can call it synapse gap. That is D. Can you see D? Now with the gap, remember, impulses are transmitted from the dendrites to the dendrites of the next or the other neuron. Okay? All right, part that has an insulating function is myelin sheath. We have learned about that. All right, when we wrap up the section, or when we wrap up the session, so we are going to look at diseases of the nervous system. Remember, we've spoken about the nervous system consisting of nerves, consisting of neurons. And now what is going to happen? We still have diseases of the nervous system. One of the diseases, we have Alzheimer's disease. Now, what is that disease? It is most common form of dementia. Now, with dementia is a general term used for memory loss. You can relate it to memory loss. When you start to lose memory, think of what? Maybe something is wrong with your the neurons. Okay? Usually it affects people over 65 years of age, right? Although some people may develop early onset AD, Alzheimer's disease is AD, characterized by loss of what? Neurons. Remember, we've got millions of neurons. Immediately when you lose some of the neurons, that will cause what? Memory loss. Because remember, the impulses are transmitted to the central nervous system. So if that is not happening, what is going to happen? If you've got loss of neurons, what is going to happen? No impulses will be transmitted to the brain, and you are likely to lose what? Memory. You are going to forget. Okay? So It is characterized by loss of neurons and synapses in the cortex of the brain. So this is the brain, this is the cortex of the brain, this area here. Now check, severe Alzheimer's disease. What will happen? Neurons. You have lost most of the neurons at the cortex of the brain. So it will lead to memory loss and you are going to be forgetful, right? So cause of AD, cause of Alzheimer's disease is unknown. But what we are saying, scientifically it has been proven that loss of neurons can lead to what? To AD, all right? The other disease, okay, disease of the nervous system symptoms. How do we see that this person has got AD, has got Alzheimer's disease? Slower thinking, behavioral changes, confusion about events, time and place. You wake up, you tell yourself it's a day, only to find that it's night. Okay, I'm just wrapping up for 1 minute. Cure of AD, there's no cure for the disease. There's no cure for the disease at the moment. Right? Now, 1 minute. Disease of the nervous system. The other one, we've got multiple sclerosis, which is MS. Remember, that one is AD. This one is MS. It is a degenerative disorder of the central nervous system, including the brain, optic nerve, and also the spinal cord. Now, it is commonly diagnosed between the ages of 20 to 40. So we are at high risk, 20 to 40 ages. And it affects more women than men, okay? Multiple sclerosis means many scars resulting in the damage of myelin sheath. Remember, myelin sheath speed up the transmission of the impulses. So if myelin sheath as an insulator again is damaged, then one can end up having what? MS. Okay, I'm finishing up. Symptoms of the MS. Now, symptom of the multiple sclerosis, which affects mostly women between the ages of 20 to 40. Now, symptoms, movement, feeling and coordination and balance is affected. Vision, you cannot see clearly, tingling of numbness, weakness, fatigue, bladder and bowel problems. So when you have all of those symptoms, you need to consult so that you can verify whether this is a disease of the nervous system or not. Pain, those are some of the symptoms. The mood swings, they are some of the symptoms. Cure for MS, now for cure for MS, there's no cure for that. Right, how can we manage that? How can we prevent that? We can live a healthy lifestyle. Now, with a healthy lifestyle, do a lot of exercise, girls, as it is affecting more women. A lot of exercise, eat healthy food. You know, when I talk about healthy food, no more junk, But then, yes, your lifestyle need to change to avoid the multiple sclerosis. So we have come to the end of our second session, girls and boys. And thank you so much. Make sure you study that topic because we said it carries most marks of paper 1. So if you do well here, you are likely to pass your paper 1. All right? Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon and the evening and prepare, study hard for the next coming examinations. I thank you.